welcome to yet another session of In Dialogue Foundation's Certificate Course in Dialogue Studies 2024-2025. We have the pleasure of having with us today Chris H., who would be speaking on Service Work in 2025, Sharp Edge with a Soft Side. Chris is the CEO of Service Academy. Within the conservative movement, Chris is devoted to restoring the liberalism of the American founding, rooting out runaway progressive politics, and crafting sensible foreign policy that will enable American security, prosperity, and liberty. Chris has completed his master's program in foreign policy with China at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which is a hybrid education between Tufts and Harvard. Prior to his pivot to the policy world, Chris spent 5 years in management consulting with United Health Group's Optum Consulting. Chris, you have up to 2 hours for the session. You may leave as much time for questions and discussions as you like. Sir, the floor is all yours.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So I used to work at Leadership Institute and Heritage Foundation and Optum Consulting and a lot of other places. But I started my own company now. It's called Service Academy. And we are focused on the importance of service to yourself, to your neighbor, to society as sort of a foundational principle that can be expressed in behavior. And those behaviors are actually measurable. And why that's important is because people are losing touch, it seems, at least in parts of the West anyway. And I have sort of a dotted line around India in the West, which I can talk about more. But people are losing touch with various behaviors that have been essentially the bedrock of certainly productivity, but you might just call it culture or even society for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Or you could just say go back 2 generations, but you could also go back 200 generations. I think India is a really interesting example of this because India still has retained several core cultural behaviors that are, you might say, a ballast, that are keeping India in relatively good standing compared to some other nations and other cultures more broadly. But even those, if that were to change, it would most likely yield the same negative results. So don't let those things go, right? Don't let some of those customs and traditions falter. So the reason that I'm quick to correct people about Leadership Institute or Heritage Foundation or some of these other things is because while what I'm talking about is conservative stuff, it's explicitly not political. And so I'm not talking about taxes or something like that, right? We're using conservative in a very accepted and comforting sense of the word. I mean, it's in the sense that you're all probably sitting on a chair right now, right? Well, that's a conservative chair, because it hasn't had to change very much in probably 30,000 years. It's conserved the basics of being a chair. The reason for that is because it works. It works. You can sit on it. That's all it means. That's all we're talking about when we say conservative, is keeping good ideas. Almost everything in your life, by that definition, is conservative. 99.99% of the things in your day are things that have been around for a while. And the reason they're still around, they're conserved, is because they work, right? So that's what your ceiling is. That's what your shoes are. That's what so many different things are. But there's other things that you might say work, but that are up for grabs. And they might be up for grabs for good reasons, right? So the institution of marriage works, but for who and in what ways, right? And so these are things that are coming under questioning. I watched the Socratic Dialogue session that you guys did. That's a very interesting guy. I'm sure he and I could have great conversations about tax policies and things like that. But I'm a huge fan of Socrates. In fact, the inner lining of my coat, which you can't see it, but it's the School of Athens. So those kinds of things matter to me a lot. And he was a guy who really encouraged questioning, and the Greek word was elenkos, and it's the state in which your mind is in a state of wonder. And Socrates tried to remain in that state for as long as he could. That's why he said, "I don't know anything. I'm always wondering." And so I really think that's critical. I think those things are really important. So the question then the question becomes, well, okay, so like, what's good and what's bad, and what are some things that are worth keeping, and what are some things that we should try to change? And I think that there's actually a practical answer for this. So it doesn't have to be political or ideological or any of those things. The answers are practical. Just in the same way that if you tried to make a new kind of a chair, except for nobody could sit on it, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Like, I don't care if you're really proud of it or you think it's better for everybody. It's just not. Just isn't. Right? And there's no argument about that. The people just say kind of no, just not interested, right? We already have a chair. So there's other things that, you could consider are also that way. Now, one of the ones I mentioned that's up for grabs is, say, marriage. That one, India is a wonderful example of a place where certainly marriage is done a little differently, or at least has been done differently, but where it's also still very strong. And I have yet to go to an Indian wedding, so I feel like I'm like somehow uninitiated, right? But nevertheless, there's something to that. It's not just man and woman come together and so on and so forth. There's a lot going on. I mean, the ritual it's very, very robust. I mean, it could be a week-long festival. You might go to 10 this year, 10 next year, 10 the year after that. I mean, that's a significant thing. And you consider like another place, like, I don't know, somewhere in Scandinavia where, it's merely a legal agreement, for example. There's no pomp and circumstance whatsoever. Obviously, it's less significant. That's the definition of significant. It's less of a big deal. And so in that place, it's going to be a higher incidence of divorce, probably fewer kids. And sure enough, that's what you see. Now, that might be good in your estimation. Might not be. But there's no denying that they're related, that the customs and the behaviors that you live out in your life are related to what you're going to see happen in your life. And I think we've been living in a situation largely led by the West, and over the last 80 years by America, where we've been treating novelty as something fundamentally virtuous. So anything that's new is wonderful, right? Like Jell-O. There was a time when Jell-O, basic Jell-O, was like a luxury dessert, just because it was brand new. And so but like, is Jell-O actually better than creme brulee? No, it's not, right? Creme brulee is better than Jell-O. So is baklava, so are lots of other things. So similarly, art, like new art, which was like just not beautiful, but was making a commentary. It's like art that's about art. You need a manual to understand the art. Like, well, it turns out that, that's probably not as good as something that's just beautiful. And sure enough, people sort of like gone to fewer and fewer museums and enjoy more and more going hiking and just the beauty of nature kind of a thing, right? And so there's a lot of different examples of this where what we're finding out is that there are good ideas, things that are good, that we almost all agree that they're good. Even people who disagree on everything else still agree that certain behaviors are good behaviors. And we've managed to just wander away from all of them whilst we were discarding what we believed to be ossified institutions. Could be the church, could be a form of government you're not a fan of, could be whatever. But whatever it is that you're trying to discard and get rid of from the past, there's a decent chance that if you discard everything about it, you're probably discarding some good things too. And we're at a point where we're sort of having to grapple with, have we thrown away too many good things in the pursuit of making a perfect world? Like, have we actually inadvertently made things worse? And there's decent evidence to suggest that in some ways, yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. So again, that's an example of a saying that hasn't changed much, right? It's not a conservative saying. It's just a saying that is conserved because it's true, right? And so this is true of, it turns out, many things. But we have novel problems now. We have new problems, and that's not untrue. So, social media, for example, right? So the question becomes, hey, wait a minute. I wonder if some of these old things that we stopped doing because they weren't cool or whatever actually might help us. And we at Service Academy believe the answer is very firmly yes. So I'm just going to tell you guys about Service Academy, specifically our small groups and kind of what we do. And we'll discuss what we're up to. And hopefully that will open up some fun questions. And then we can have like a robust discussion following that. Because I'm really interested in what you guys have to say. By the way, for those of you who weren't on the call yet, In Dialogue Foundation is a partner of Service Academy. This is my cool mug. Thank you guys very much. So that's like a little snapshot of like what is Service Academy. Our model is that we do lectures. So this is not exactly a lecture, but it's an example of what a lecture could be. Could be a Zoom lecture, but also like we would do like a workshop that might be like a full day long or a full week long, or maybe just a couple hours, something like that, where we talk about one such behavior that we believe is an effective behavior. But we also have small groups, and that's what I'm really interested in telling you guys about today, in part because you might want to start one. And if you do, I'll support you in starting a small group. What small groups are grassroots. So small group is where you come together as a group, you form your own group. You talk about some of these same behaviors that we're going to talk about today a little bit, but you talk about them in greater depth as a group. Something good like waking up earlier, trying to be honest, trying not to lie, which is bizarrely a more effective way of being honest than trying to be honest. And so many things are like that. Like you define them in the negative to get the best result. But it's counterintuitive. So we'll talk about something like that. And then as a group, we'll go out into the community and we'll do a service project of some kind. So it could be picking up trash. It could be, shoveling snow or raking leaves for an elderly person or a veteran of a war. It could be even just going to an old age home and listening and letting people tell their stories for a little while, just sitting and listening as a group while someone tells their whole story, just sitting at the feet of your elders and letting them teach you. So all of these constitute service work, and you do them together. And that all would be Service Academy small group. And it's totally grassroots. So it's driven by you. And I support it, and I could zoom in and help however you want, and so can others from Service Academy. But the fun part about it is that it's for you and by you, and it serves you. Now, you're actually serving the community, but you're the one who gets the benefit. I mean, they get the benefit that day. You get the benefit over time. You get all the dividends. And this turns out to be one of those kind of another counterintuitive or defined by the negative kinds of tricks that seems paradoxical, but it's actually like one of the keys to a good life. and you can't substitute it, right? So if it's like paid for by the government or by a religious organization or a political organization, it doesn't deliver the same sort of inner rewards because it's motivated differently. It has to be actual altruism. It has to be your own time and your own energy. You can't even just give money. Even if you just choose to give money, that's good. I'm not saying don't do those other things, but none of them do for you what altruism does. And this is yet another way that we have sort of wandered from what was once a commonly understood things. And I'm really interested in India for this discussion because while India is still developing in some ways, the solutions to some of the problems that the West is facing are things that India is already doing. And so I want to like head off any potential deviation from what are good things that are happening in India. And I think India could be a leader in this space and kind of jump the shark and go to first place in a couple of big categories. And we're going to talk about some of those things today. So hopefully you guys have some thoughts there too. So let's talk about a small group. Have you guys ever heard this proverb? It's a Chinese proverb. May you live in interesting times. Maybe, maybe not. It's a pun. It's sort of I don't know. It's sort of a curse. So the joke here is when you say may you live in interesting times, if you look back on all of the interesting times in history where you might think to yourself, ooh, like I wish that, I was there when, I don't know, like Napoleon heroically did blah, 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 right? Or Pride and Prejudice, like, ooh, right? And like all of these things. What those stories are defined by is hardship. Those stories are defined by struggle. And they're stories of overcoming those struggles. So that's what you like about them. And that's what makes them interesting instead of tragic, right? But the fact is that this Chinese proverb, it's thought of as a curse, is like careful what you wish for, basically. Like if you're going to live in interesting times, it means there's probably a war happening. And so there's a lot of people who are feeling this way now and are like maybe inadvertently leading themselves to a place they don't want to be. So we'll find out. Do you guys understand what I'm referencing here? Hard, strong, good, soft. These are pieces of like a sort of loosely famous kind of a quote. So the quote is that hard times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make soft men. Soft men make hard times. So the idea, it's a story of decadence. It's a story of, grandfather's generation, Great Depression. They understood the value of a dollar, all that stuff, right? And then from them, they create the good times. That's the baby boomers, and the baby boomers live this sort of dream existence that will never be recreated in all of human history, most likely. And then all of the prosperity that they have enjoyed and passed forward has created like these new generations of like wayward, aimless, lost Chris's wandering the world who don't know what to do with themselves. And then, of course, our weakness is what will lead to some, catastrophe. And then that catastrophe will generate the next group of great men, the next Great Depression, greatest generation people who fought in World War I, struggled through the Great Depression, and then fought in World War II before like handing off the keys to the kingdom to the baby boomers and everything else. So you are faced now with a very novel situation. The West more broadly, people in the West specifically, and then people in India and South Asia generally, in a specific but slightly different way. Same but a little different. Classic India, right? So we know this. We see it. In the previous times that this sort of a thing was happening, things were different. I mean, there just wasn't an internet. There wasn't globalism. there wasn't, loosely speaking, public education for the whole entire planet. So it was always like, oh, this is inevitable. Oh, like, how do we stave off decadence? Well, we'll print all the money we can and we'll hope for the best, right? I mean, you can list all of the great empires and their decline, their 100-year decline, Rome, the Tang Dynasty in China, and many, many others. And for all of them, you can point to hyperinflation, right? That's one way to look at history. People are trying to print their way out of economic hardship because they're afraid to work their way out of it. They're afraid to go backwards, to be seen to be going backwards, to belt tighten, because maybe that'll lead to a political crisis of some kind, whatever. We know all of this. You would think, okay, then we can avoid it. And yet, here we are. Things seem to be falling apart anyway, right? Where's all this progress I was promised? I thought I'd have a jetpack. Like, what's going on here? I thought things are supposed to be way better than they are, not getting worse. So, you know that for sure that the good times that we are living in are supposed to make soft men happen now and what comes next, right? And we know, and women too, but in different ways. And then you know for sure that soft men and women too, but in different ways, are supposed to invite chaos, right? That weakness invites, it's a vacuum. It invites some form of chaos, some form of difficulty that will inevitably then happen. And so, is it possible for us to avoid this? Can we somehow make hard men without inflicting World War III on the planet Earth? Is there a way to do it? Otherwise, let's just join the ranks of the doomsdayers and everybody else's who are all just sort of prepping and waiting for the end in their various forms and fashions, right? So there's got to be a way to do it, but it's actually probably a little bit more complicated than you think, right? Like, the Nazis were an example of hard men who came at a time of weakness, but they weren't a good example of it, right? Stalin's armies were examples of hard men who came at times of weakness, but they weren't good examples of it. How do you do this in such a way that it actually results in a positive outcome? It's a real brain buster, but fortunately, we actually have a couple of ways that we can address this that we know work, just like how we know chair. Although you could complicate it, it's chair. We know chair. It's not that complicated, right? We don't have to, if we got rid of the concept of chair, we'd just invent it again because it's chair. So there are things that we know are good. And if we focus on them, we can at least be, loosely speaking, pretty sure that we're steering in what is probably a good direction. We're not going to go off a cliff. So before I touch on some of those things, let's talk about some of these signs, just in case you're thinking, okay, Chris, stop calling us soft boys. We don't like it. And what makes you so hard, right? Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, it's us. It's an us thing, right? But you're saying, well, maybe times are just great, Chris. Why don't you just enjoy the ride, dude? Like, things have never been better. What are you so worried about? You're just looking for meaning. You just want to feel important, just like everybody else does, because you're just trying to be a big deal. Well, you're not wrong. Classic narcissist. However, there are some signs that things are starting to actually crumble. So here are some of them. You know that there are many more. Deaths of despair have increased more than 300% since 2000, and it's not like plateauing. Deaths of despair are skyrocketing and getting worse all the time. That includes everything from addiction to suicide to obesity to you name it, right? All of it. But there's so much more. In America alone, over 54 million people needed drug and alcohol treatment in 2023. I can guarantee you that that number is shy. That number doesn't count the real number because how could it, right? There's so much of this goes unreported. It's impossible to know. You would, loosely speaking, say at best that's 60% of who needed help, right? And this is already this is close to 20% of Americans. So, I mean, it's not a small number of people who need treatment, as if, oh, go to a doc. He's going to give you a book about how to not be addicted. It doesn't work. I'm sure of it. I'll tell you why in a moment. New addictions. Heard of these things? Porn, social media, gaming, screens. So it's not bad enough that drug and alcohol and obesity and suicide are skyrocketing. But so is everything else. We're inventing new ways to be bad. Not bad, not morally bad, but to be less than we would like to be in a way that's significant to us, right? Over time, not like an individual. I don't care if you play a game, if you've seen porn, or you have an Instagram account or whatever. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is it compulsive? Is it taking over your life? And all of these things, sadly, my friends, are trending up in significant ways. And they're not slowing down whatsoever. In fact, we're inventing whole fields of technology around them, including the internet itself. Funny. Okay, well, let's continue. Suicide. Fun. This is a fun topic. 40% increase since 2000 in America, but throughout the West as well. Now, that doesn't mean everybody everywhere, right? It was like 10 out of 1,000. Now it's 14. But still, it's a 40% increase, which as an indicator can only be bad. The OECD, having traveled to India a fair amount, a couple of times, I know that there are certain clubs that India is interested in joining. And I'm pretty sure that the OECD might be one of them. Well, don't be so sure, my friends. In the OECD countries, the birth rate is, loosely speaking, pathetic. Only one country in all of the 38 OECD countries, the country of Israel, has a birth rate above 2.1. South Korea's is like 0.8 or some insanely low number. 2.1 means that every mom and dad have 2.1 babies because there's infant mortality. So it means that for every mom and dad, there are a new mom and dad coming after them, right? 2 people for every 2 people. When your birth rate in South Korea is 0.8, it means your country's dead. It's over. There's nothing left. It's gone. And that's what's going on. China is in this problem. You might think, well, it's only the... No. China has an extremely low birth rate because of its one-child policy and other matters. So demographics, I'm not going to do a whole lecture on demographics, but I could. I've read the books. They're back here. Those are demographics books. I'm a geopolitics guy. I know these things. Demographics genuinely do matter. And there are certain countries whose demographic profile is so bad that if they did well, if they came out of it okay, it'd be the first time in history that a country has come out of such a situation okay. I'm not predicting the future. I'm just telling you it'd be the first time in history that it has happened. That a country in South Korea's position wound up doing great 20 years from now. Japan's also a little bit in trouble. But all 37 out of 38 are in real trouble. Immigration is how you can avoid. Yeah, but those people have to come from somewhere too. And there's a cultural distinction. Now things are different from how they were. Marriage is also in significant decline throughout. So we started out talking about marriage. Maybe that's cool. I don't know. Maybe it isn't. Who knows? Let's find out, right? What could go wrong? People are also dropping out of the workforce. Overall mental health is plummeting across the board. Atomization, meaning you're alone a lot, skyrocketing. By the way, when you're alone with your phone, your people brain is highly stimulated. But your reptile brain and your mammal brain and your monkey brain know that you're alone. So you're living in cognitive dissonance. You're like, you think you're in 2 different places at the same time. And that's why you're depressed, even though you're like enjoying doom scrolling and you wind up depressed. How does that happen? Well, that's how it happens. Because you're alone, but you don't think you're alone, but you are. So there's a lot of this stuff going on and much, much, much more. And it's like, oh boy, like, what are we supposed to do? This is all so novel. Ooh, boy. Dr. Verma, I can't wait to hear more. So all of this is so novel. I bet the solution must be novel too. Somebody call a smart person. What do we do? Right? Well, probably. Oh, that was a terrible segue. I'm not the smart person. What we do is, like, we do normal things that have always worked. It isn't that we have new problems. I mean, we do have new problems, but they're represented by gaps in things that we've always needed, right? So it's things like community, it's things like feeling productive, it's things like being proud of yourself. Those things are still attainable, and they'll lead to the innovations that we need, but you're not going to receive that from on high. It's something that you can only achieve through your own behavior. And so, in other words, we're not going to solve the problem first. We're not going to invent the thing and then go chase it. Instead, we're going to track towards what we know to be a mysterious solution, but we're going to do that with good behaviors. That's the model of Service Academy. So I hope you're all right, whatever your big solutions are, but I'm going to help you be more effective at making those solutions realities, right? That's what Service Academy does for you. So who am I and why do I get to say any of this stuff? Well, I'm Chris. I founded the Service Academy and I'm its president. I attended Vanderbilt University and the Fletcher School of International Law and Diplomacy, which is a hybrid education between Tufts and Harvard Universities. While there, I studied U.S. foreign policy with China. I lived in China. I also lived in Geneva, China, learning Mandarin and Chinese history, Geneva learning French and not Swiss history, just French. And I also studied international business, which fits for me because I used to be a consultant, and I, loosely speaking, have always tried to understand the importance of how money moves and how people think. And those two things are very, very related. So the health of a state and its economy are not like two things, they're connected. It's one thing. So I believe that was true at the geopolitical level as well. So that's why I added international business to China studies. I've worked in think tanks in Washington, D.C. I currently teach this stuff as well as the history of China at the graduate level. But for our purposes today, what's almost most important is that for the last 14 years, I have been actively involved in service work with the addiction and recovery communities in the United States of America, including like being the guy who oversees populations of people. You live in the facility and you oversee populations of people who are trying to recover from the worst time of their whole life, and a number of other situations like that. Plus just ongoing service work at all times, several times a week with these populations. So I've seen what works for people who are in despair. I just have seen what works. So that's what makes me so frustrated by some of the problems that I see happening in society now. Because although some of them are substance abuse related, almost inevitably, all of them have to do with many of the same emotional and psychological wellness states that are going on with those communities. And we've already got the solutions. We already know how those populations find their way out of that darkness. And there's no reason to not apply those same solutions across the board since they're just good things, right? It's like got nothing to do with heroin. It's like making your bed, getting up early, right? So this stuff works for everybody. So why not focus on it and see where that takes us? Maybe if we can add that hard edge, that discipline, we can make ourselves into the hard men, the hard women who will be needed to steer our way out of this problem that we're in. And then worst case scenario, even if the bad men come, we'll be there, right? So what could go wrong? I will tell you more about how service has changed my life in many interesting ways, but I want to get us through a couple more slides here, and maybe I'll do that anecdotally when we take some questions, perhaps. But I hope this gives you a little bit of background into why I'm so motivated about this. As I said, it's not political or religious or anything like that. It's really because I've seen so many people who have been suicidal, who have killed themselves, and I've seen so many who haven't, who were in the same place. And I know the difference. I've seen the difference between those two populations, the people who took their own life and the people who didn't. And it's just a behavioral thing. It's a switch. It's wrong to call it a mindset, although there's no form of talking about things that don't involve a mindset. But it's not really, it's a behavior. You have to make decisions that involve actions. You have to do the actions. But if you do them, good things happen. Very simple. It's not necessarily easy. It's very simple. So these things work just like chair, and there's no reason that we shouldn't try them, right? So at Service Academy, we do theory. We talk about depth psychology, Carl Jung, Jordan Peterson, all that cool stuff, right? Habit building, the Stoics. We'll use the Marine Corps Code of Conduct. We'll think of things that we know are effective. That's the only metric. Is this effective? And if it is, we'll run through it. We'll like run the experiment and see where we wind up, right? Ancient wisdom, the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedic texts, the Buddha, right? Jesus, maybe Confucius, more of a Tao Te Ching guy myself, but Confucius had some good points, one or two. But there's so much more. We'll talk about professionalism. We'll talk about like the modern ways, the 7 habits of highly effective people, for example, right? How to win friends and influence people. We'll help people find a calling. So at a certain point, you have to do something with yourself, right? That's part of the problem here. People are just kind of sitting. So we'll help people figure out what to do. The tactics ultimately will help you with your resume, your cover letter, networking, job interviews, all this professional development stuff. Like, we're going to teach you all of it for free. The whole thing's free. I don't get paid for any of it. Salary negotiations, public speaking, work products, budgeting. It's all built. I used to do this for a living. So decision making, all these key things like how to buy a house. Should I quit my job? Should I go to grad school? My parents want me to be a doctor, but I don't want to be. All that. Like, how do you make a decision? Whose life is it? It's kind of a trick question. And we take action, right? So we have our small groups where we implement changes in our own lives, and we do it together. You're not alone. We have cleanup events. We help an elder, veterans relief. We'll do a fun day, just plan a day where the whole community is invited out to just enjoy themselves, and you put it on for the community. We have little beautification projects. This is a popular one. By the way, these things are happening all over the place. So these are cropping up in Spain and Poland, up and down the east coast of America, throughout India, in Nepal, and in Bangladesh so far, with more coming behind that in the UK, Hungary, the Balkans, and other parts of India and other parts of America. And so all of these things are already happening, and people are already seeing the benefits of them. And it's kind of fun. It's exciting to be a part of something that's like starting, which you guys are all welcome to join the team. It's super fun, and you just do it yourselves, and it's great. So why does this model work? Well, one, Service Academy is grassroots, right? So it's done by us, by you, by me. In other words, it's not done by the government. It's not a political ideology. It's not a religion. And so it's free. And so there's no ulterior motive. The only point of Service Academy is for you to have a better life today than you otherwise would have. That's it. That's it. You do that by improving other people's lives. But the point is you. So that's why we do it. It's personal and it's professional. So ultimately, what you do with your time at work, it's wrong to think that where you spend 40 to 60 hours a week is somehow just work. It's most of your life. So we help you navigate that question for yourselves as well. We give you a community. So you have a community of like-minded individuals who have an opportunity to come together, to learn, to help one another, and to be of service to their communities. There's a great expression I love, which is that people really only need 2 things in life. The first is to be effective, to be useful. And the second is to exchange love, to give and receive love. And if you have those two things, if you're useful, like in other words, I try to get out of bed and I do get out of bed, right? As opposed to I try and I don't. So if you're useful, you're in good shape. And if you're able to give and receive love, there has to be another person involved, you're in good shape, right? So you have a community and you're able to be of service to that community, and it's good. Our aim is to have every graduate come away with the actions and behaviors that translate into real world results in their own lives. A lot of this stuff, once you become a billionaire and you hire an executive coach or a life coach or a therapist or whatever, they're going to tell you some of the same stuff that I'm going to tell you for free, right? And the reason that it works is because most health advice, mental health and physical advice and physical health, if you're extremely unhealthy, it's all good advice, right? The basics of like an apple a day keeps the doctor away or whatever. There's mental health equivalents to that too, and behavioral health and physical health. And unfortunately, we're in a situation right now as a society where people are way off track in a lot of these categories. So just providing the basics for free has a huge reward, huge benefit. And the model is based on the time-tested wisdom and is built to address the growing aimlessness and isolation in many populations. First, we serve the inner self. We help you wake up, so to speak. And then we figure out your immediate surroundings, clean your room, make your bed, that kind of thing. And then your community as well, clean your side of the street. And then we talk about the future self. So this is an important concept for Service Academy, but it's also an important concept, period. You should think of your future self as a friend, and you should think of your past self as an ally. In other words, where you are right now should feel like somewhere that past you got you there. Like you're stoked. Like, thanks, past me. We did it, right? And you should be doing things for your future self that you're excited about. Like, I can't wait for future self to enjoy this thing, right? That you're going to give to future self. That's how you think about it. And it works. It's real. It's not like just made up. And then we do creation. So like, okay, you do all this stuff, but then what? Well, maybe it's time to start a family. Maybe it's time to start a business. Maybe it's time to run for office. You decide, right? But you become a creator as opposed to one who merely attends these things, right? And throughout all of this, you do service work to your community. And service applies at every level. And why it's so important is because any of these things, whether you're focusing on your inner self or your local community self or your future self or whatever, you can get lost in it. You can become neurotic about physical health, about mental health, about political things, whatever. But if you actually go out and serve a stranger with your time and energy, it centers you. It brings you back into the day, into the present, and it keeps you humble. And so as long as you don't stop doing service and you try to do this other stuff, you're going to always wind up better, no matter how many different ways and times we fail. It'll always wind up better. So that's the model. And the reason that service does that for you is because it's voluntary, it's productive, it's helpful, it builds a community, and it's active. So you can't do it from lying on your back, and you have to choose to do it. You're automatically useful to somebody else. They get helped by you, and it builds a community. And we do them together. I'll send you guys t-shirts. You go out in a group of 5 and pick up some trash, and you'll feel better at the end of the day. So that's what Service Academy does, and we're excited. This is just stuff about small groups. We can sort of jump to conversation now. I've been talking a lot. But what an example of a small group would be is like, we'll just talk about the importance of telling the truth or whatever. And then people go around the room discussing it. Nobody has to share. You don't have to give us money. You don't have to even give your email or your last name or whatever, or your first name. I don't care. Just show up. Just get out of your house and show up. And then we'll go out and do some work together, and you can come for some or all. I recommend you hang out for a while and chat with people about the weather and sports, whatever else you want to talk about. Who's cricketing later today, whatever. And that's it. And you've done that, and you did your job. You did your service academy duty that Saturday afternoon, and your life is a little bit better than it otherwise would have been. And it was free and easy and totally attainable. So that's what Service Academy is. That's kind of what we're up to and the philosophy behind it. So I know I went big to small. So if there's anything that I talked about in terms of global trends that was especially interesting to you, or anything I talked about in terms of small behaviors that was especially intriguing to you, or just the model itself, I'm eager to talk to you guys about this. It's kind of a new idea, but like I said, it's a new idea that's based on timeless wisdom. So I'm curious to hear from you guys and to open up this conversation for more Q&A. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you so much, Chris. I haven't heard this kind of a talk which makes so much sense. Coming from somebody who's from the other side of the spectrum, I actually found a lot of sense in what you said. Not all of it, of course, but yes. But then I loved how you presented it. It was absolutely amazing, and I wish the people in India who are on the other side of the spectrum could also use some of the facts, figures to come to a discussion table, because at the end of the day, I think it does not matter which side you're on. It's as long as you can sit and talk and listen, and I think we could all understand each other and probably make the world a better place. So absolutely loved your talk. I would open the floor for a discussion and questions, and the way we go about it is that we obviously invite people to raise their hands, but since there are already a couple of comments, like Randall wanted to sort of know about about the demographics part, and Purvi had a comment, so I will just read that out to you.
Yeah, please.
Oh, I don't know. I think that comment is, I can't find it anymore. Oh yeah, different countries, same propaganda. There's a lot of biopolitics at play. So that's her comment, and yes.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I need a little clarity on the propaganda and the biopolitics, but I'm happy to contribute however I can.
Yes, Purvi, please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Chris. Good evening,
Hi.
everybody. Hi. Okay. Interesting. So I'm a doctor by profession, a public health professional,
Great.
an MBBS, yes, who's also into politics. So through your lecture, I'd like to say that Indians, by virtue, they have this inherent in them, the feeling of altruism. So I can say this whole lot, so that you can get an idea sitting there that Indians do have the feeling of and the concept of altruism. It isn't built in our DNA. We really like to help our people. When it came, when you're talking about demographics, and Randall, my colleague, he said, isn't it good? So I just want to put out there, because we've studied demographics in public health. So I understand that, certain countries, and especially the global north, I'm sorry if I'm saying it very, let's say, I do not have filters, okay? So I would not, please do not mind. Yeah. I think the global north comes up with all these indicators, and they just throw it out to the global south. And then India, by virtue of, following, we just want to accept those indicators, and which is very true for the population norms. Let's say fertility rate, the death rate, the birth rate, controlling of behavior. So initially, the government wanted the fertility rate to decrease, right? We wanted it to become come near the replacement level, which is 2 or 2.1. For every parents to be replaced by their kids, and then they become parents. Now that certain countries, especially global south, when it is achieving it, the global north is losing it. Okay, now they're coming up with this propaganda that if we have less children, if we have less population, if we have more of aging, then who's gonna take care of the others? This kind of sort of yes, this kind of narrative is going on. And I've been seeing it for the past 10, 15 years, ever since I was practicing, that India was hell bent on attaining that certain status, right? Of achieving that fertility rate, achieving the replacement level. And now that we have achieved almost, we now have the TFR of 2.1, just like how you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And now people deciding to not have kids, and I'm one of them, right? And there are a lot many, but then we get bombarded with the narrative that all right, 2.3, 2.1, yes, replacement, Randall mentioned. So now we get bombarded with the narrative that, people are not marrying, people are not having kids, or people are not following the norms. So it, in a way, it makes us, let's say, criminals. That is why I said there's biopolitics at play. I'd like to quote Foucault here and say that governments and institutions want to control bodies, and they decide what is right and what is wrong. And I think individuals get carried away in that. So yeah, that's what I meant, that there's a lot of propaganda at play.
Oh yeah, that's a very rich topic. Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure you and I could probably have long talks about Foucault, who had plenty of smart ideas about relativism, um, and then others that I thought fell short. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if you're saying the from my perspective, I mean, if the fertility rate, the birth rate is 2.3, I don't see any issue, right? I mean, what's the issue? The issue, the demographic issue that I'm referring to is it's a situation in China, for example, called getting old before you get rich. China, because they had the one-child policy and their birth rates were very low, obviously, where 2.1 would have been sustainable. Now they, on top of that, speaking of Foucault and controlling people and stuff like that, interesting convergence of Marxisms here.
Yeah, no, but I see that, initially the governments, they want you to follow a certain norm, kind of a dictatorship, right? They want you to have less kids because apparently the population is bursting off, right? And then when you achieve that status or a norm, they want you to have kids. So there is somebody dictating, right? So you have to follow all those norms. You're not making decisions on your own accord. There's always like a,
Did you have to? I mean, in China, you had to. They would kill your brother. More likely, they would have killed you. They killed the girls.
That's what I'm saying.
That was Communist Society of China. So that is population control. And what they have now is a population disaster because, first of all, they have way more boys than girls. And so you can't even start families. But second of all, those boys, obviously, they have to compete like crazy with each other for a wife. And then when they get one, they're supposed to have a lot of kids now because their population is in crisis. But they can't afford it because they're taking care of 4 parents plus the wife and the kids. And so they're working 9-9-6, 9 to 9, 6 days a week, right? And the wife also works a lot of the time, but then who's taking care of the kids? And so I think you're right. I think that a lot of times when the government involves itself and dictates what's supposed to happen, they wind up making things just as bad in a new way as what they were trying to solve. But from my perspective, I don't think we really disagree. I'm just talking more about what are people up to? Like, does a man want to meet a woman and perhaps make a family? Yes or no? You don't have to, but is it like on the table? Is it something, or are people just staying home alone? Right. And certainly in some parts of definitely the global north, for example, almost all parts, that's what you're seeing in striking trends. So the stuff you're talking about, like I think there's a lot of rich stuff there. I think, I might quibble a little bit with your use of dictatorship to describe all government policy in the context of there are dictatorships, but not all governments are dictatorships. Nevertheless, I kind of know what you mean, right? And
I meant authoritarianism, like, they're coming from top down. There's an approach, right? So that's what I meant. So my question right now here is, so let's say there's a group of teenagers, or let's say women, who want to do something as opposed to the governmental policies of, let's say certain federal governments have banned abortion, or, right to access to reproductive health. What would your institution do in that case? Would you go against the norm and help these individuals, or would you just sit with them and ask them to follow the guidelines?
Well, we can't. We're not a medical facility. We can't give abortions to people.
No, I'm
doesn't
not
really
saying that.
apply.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying whether you sit with them and mediate a process, whether you ask them, because you were talking.
No, I
about
would encourage them to do whatever they're called to do. There's
Okay.
if first of all, I think the way that you're talking about government is not really related to what Service Academy does in some sense. Because what we do is we talk about all people in any government and in any culture, but the basics of peopleness, like that you need others, is not really in dispute, right? That you need people to fully understand yourself and to understand the human experience. You're going to be left so short of what could be a beautiful and rich experience if you don't have someone in your life who you serve, who you voluntarily serve, right? And vice versa. So that's kind of the ways that we're approaching that. And I mean, does somebody feel motivated to become very political on a given issue? Great, go for it, right? Somebody else doesn't? Okay, great, go for it, right? I'm not going to dictate to either person which thing they should care most about. But what I will help them each do is find something to care about, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Cool. Anybody else?
Yeah, Dr. Denny, and then Solomon, you can ask. Thank you.
Hi, Chris. Hope I'm audible. Okay.
Hi.
I'm Dr.
Good evening.
Same like Dr. Purvi, I work as a public health specialist in Kerala, India. So actually, the first thing I would like to make is a statement, like you had told, like actually our generation we have not been exposed to hard times. So most of us are actually soft men. So actually, many soft men don't realize that they don't know how to deal with the hard times or tough situations. So that's my take. And one more, I just want to get a personal opinion from you. Like the present generation, like one thing is you had mentioned is about like not getting married or against the idea of marriage. The other thing, what I find nowadays is like those who are getting married are planning not to have kids and get more time for themselves, like enjoy life, travel a lot, and like they are thinking like it's too much of a commitment to have a kid or start a family. So, what is your take on that? I would like to know.
Well, I don't have kids and I'm not married, though I'd like to be. But my brother has kids. I'm not like I'm not someone who's not planning to have kids. I want to have a lot of kids. I just run out of time, getting old. But I agree with what you're saying. I'm being, a little cheeky, a little on purpose provocative when I say that, we're all soft men. But I mean, look, people are people, but like we're also shaped by our environment, and there's a tension there. This isn't like some sort of dialectical materialism, as though environment wins, somehow nurture is all there is, or nature is all there is. Like, no, there's a tension. The tension is itself creative. Like the tension creates, and we're obviously creative. So, there's no one that annihilates the other or a third thing that is created in lieu of the other two. There's many things. So no, we're not all soft. But you're right that people don't know what to do. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm born into this culture where I just played video games for the last 10 years. Now you're telling me don't do that? I just did it. Now what do I do? Right? And I totally get that. And by the way, like some of those video games are so awesome. Like they're incredibly good. It's not like, oh, how could you? How could I? Try it. You'll be inside for the next 3 years trying to like get to the end of Skyrim, and then you'll wake up and be like, oh my God, I gotta mow the lawn, like, so this stuff is really powerful. It's really working on you in a way that's new, right? Like your grandparents, these hard men, like, well, they didn't have Zelda. They didn't have stuff that like you have. So it's novel what you're going through, or what one of your patients is going through is novel in that respect. So I think, I think that it's very like we're in a situation that we're in. It's all quite fair in that sense, but we have to find our way out of it. Like it might not be my fault, for example, that like a car drives by and splashes mud on my pants or something, right? Like I'm unfortunate, but what am I going to do? Wait for someone else to walk by and clean me? It's just my worst available plan. Even if that's what should happen, it's not gonna. Even if I make it the plan and the whole government gets behind me, it'd still take 2 years before my pants got clean. I don't have that time. I don't have that kind of time. I have my own life. And so what we're trying to help people do is figure that aspect out and figure out a way that they can plant their feet and push in a way that's meaningful for them. Does that get to where your question is? I might have forgot the second part of your question.
The second part of my question was like I wanted your personal take on like the present generation doesn't like to have kids, or they think it's more of a harder commitment to make.
Yeah, it's a big commitment to have kids. That's not like mysterious at all. We have different norms around sex conduct, but some of those norms are not that new. I mean, they're really not. It's birth control is the biggest thing. Birth control and reproductive science, abortions. So those are the biggest things. A lot of kids were accidental for the longest time, and there was all sorts of like negative outcomes before, right? It's not like things used to be perfect. They weren't. Things changed because they weren't perfect. It's part of that generates the change. But psychologically speaking, if we'll just stick to that side of things, we kind of already know what happens if you try to retire at 25. Like you get bored. So I believe one of the psychological benefits, so to speak, of kids, this is such like a cheeseball science way of describing the miracle of reproduction, but okay, let's do it, right? Like one of the psychological benefits is that you're presented with new challenges that you have to dig deep to solve. You grow. They don't grow. I mean, they grow because they're kids, but you grow because you've got to become the dad you want to be. You finally have a reason to be the good man that you always knew you should be, right? And so many other things like that. So that's like a thing, but it's not to say that, I mean, I could literally we could spend the next 10 hours listing beautiful lives that haven't involved children. And like, so it's not to say that it's a mandatory thing. But I do think that there's a little bit of like I don't know, like a narrative out there, like, oh, like don't have kids. Like, no, don't tell other people what to do. Like other people can have kids if they want to have kids, and kids are great. Don't be weird about that. Kids are great. Kids are great. Right. So, and like, if you can trace a lot of the philosophies to people who were terrible parents too, Marx, Rousseau, the list is direct. So I'd love to have a longer conversation about that. But basically my position is kids are great. Being a parent is great, but there are other things that are great too. You don't have to do that, but you certainly shouldn't be averse to it because it sounds hard. I mean, name one dream you have that's not on the other side of something hard, right? So because it's hard, that's the reason to do it, not the reason not to do it. Any other questions? Go ahead. I think Solomon, you were next. I think you're
Solomon,
on mute.
you're muted.
Thanks, Chris, for giving us a very practically, very applicable at a grassroots level sharing for us. I think it has inspired me quite a bit. And I have done quite a bit of work on this line, especially at the rural settings. But one or two things that I would like to comment upon and want to your one. See, for example, the new addictions, deaths of despair, many of these signs which are coming, it's indeed very sad for us actually to face such a situation. But don't you think that mostly these are all produced by a very wrong socioeconomic structures leading the individuals to despair, to death, to addictions? I think that we need to take care. Mainly, for example, the extreme capitalism completely relies on market to shape a society, to shape the individuals, and the individuals are accorded a very higher status than the community. There is no real balance between the individual and the community. I think India has, in a certain sense, this certain amount of balance. And therefore, getting married and looking for children, these are all part of a human, in a way, a human enterprise. It's a part of the human commitment to society and to community. And that we are losing. The market really accords a very, very, very higher, unusual, unbalanced status to individuals. And therefore, individuals who are unable to face their despair quite a bit. So I believe, I know that your center really looks after these individuals, but also how we are taught to deal with this sort of structures, socioeconomic structures, and do advocacy on that. I think this also should be part of our process. That is that is my understanding in a way. But otherwise,
yeah, well, I think I agree with you. I think that's a great point. I've heard some arguments that argue along a socioeconomic line and conclude that there's some form of government intervention that would resolve the socioeconomic issue. And I disagree. So while I might agree that people are materialistic and that the capitalism, so to speak, a free market, a nakedly free market, leads to a form of materialism that degrades community, and even the idea of personal value, because you become a consumer, right? I would disagree, though, that to mediate with the government instead of a free market has a different result. In fact, I think it's more materialistic because you wind up, instead of becoming a consumer, you're like less than that. You're merely a voter at that point, and you're at that point, we've seen what happens with a purely materialistic worldview, right? So I'm arguing from a metaphysical standpoint. I'm just not arguing a given metaphysics of any kind. So my fear is that you take something like socialism or Marxism or whatever, right? This is usually put forward as the alternative to a free market system. My fear is that you turn that into a religion and you wind up worshiping the government, just like the National Socialists, just like the Stalinists, just like so many other forms of people who are searching for meaning, which you find in community.
Not necessarily. We don't need to go extremely from one thing to the other. Actually,
sure.
What should be the balance of it? How do we seek the balance in the whole of creating a particular socioeconomic structure which will accord a balance to individuals and the community?
Demand it together. So I'm suggesting to you that if your method is to involve Sky Daddy, government daddy, to create the system that will be best for you, the mere child, then what you're doing is automatically seeding the thing that you're seeking to grow. Alternatively, you can just do it. That's why we're grassroots, and we don't ask you for your money, and we don't align with a political party, and we don't align with a religion. Because if we do it, what are you going to say? We're just going to do it ourselves. So that's why we do it that way. It's very intentional, because I'm really, really sensitive to what you're saying as a real thing, which is people are lost in marketing. I mean, they're being marketed to so heavily that they can't even know, they forget their own names. They're willing to forget their own names, right? But my answer to that is not better marketing from the government or whatever. My answer to that is like, go outside, right? Know your neighbor's name, know their dog's name, know their dog. Like, know things that are outside of these mega systems, such that it affords you the perspective you'll need to identify when either goes the wrong way. It's too market driven, or it's too government driven. The only people who can govern, who can be the calibration to that, would have to be you. It would have to be you. Who else could it be? Right? My problem with a lot of these philosophies is that ultimately they're all arguing against democracy, but they're not willing to say it out loud. But they're all arguing against that you get to decide. So the reason that I've taken the position that I've taken is because it seems to me the only position, even though it's hard, and even though it's slower probably, but it's the only one that retains all the core values that we initially would agree on as fundamental, but that so quickly becomes secondary once either a business or a government has the power it needs to make things all better. So that's my concern about that. I hope I didn't, take your question in a different direction than you meant it, because I do understand what you're trying to say.
Okay, so we are sharing. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Chris. We have Sahir who wants to ask the question, and then Randall, you can go after Sahir. Thank you.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Sir, I want to know about the Service Academy in a deep. And there is one more question which it comes to my mind. I am from social work background. I completed my MSW. There, how you are selecting a small group of persons, because the Service Academy itself, it is a service platform. It works for the whole world. And how you are singled to a small particular team. And one great initiative that I want to congratulate you. It is a great initiative which is coming forward and doing for the betterment of the humanity. And how you are selecting the small group of the people, and how you are establishing it, and how the process is going on. I will be keen to hear from you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you. I appreciate your question and your comments. So it's voluntary. So if you want to start one, you can start one. I'll help. And it's really that simple. I go around, maybe I give a speech, or someone asks me, hey, what are you up to? That kind of a thing. But we're really trying to do it grassroots. For example, we have no social media presence. I'm probably going to have to change that, but I don't want to. But I understand that, I think all these things are euphemisms. For example, to the last question, I think marketing is a euphemism. Like it's creepy. It's basically art or propaganda. It's one of the two, usually both. So we're confused, right? Like, so anyone who feels that way is welcome to start a service academy, is kind of the answer. What's winding up happening is certain communities are kind of like, oh man, I'm so glad that you said this, right? And some of those are like people who are getting out of college or grad school or something like that, where they're kind of like, I was told that this was going to work, and I don't even have something close to the job I thought I was going to have. What's going on? Is it all made up? And veterans communities in the US, people leaving the armed forces, are traditionally underemployed because they haven't found ways to talk about their skills that land for what people need in the job market. And so they wind up sort of sinking backwards into resentment, despair, oftentimes drug and alcohol addiction, things like this. So those groups, but often like it's just people. It's just people who are like, yeah, I'll start one. Maybe someone had a little brother who struggled with alcoholism and didn't make it, right? Or whatever. And they're like, I get it. I see what I get it. You don't have to explain it to me. How do I help? And they'll start a group and it works, you know? And the best part about the groups is that, like, who could complain that a service academy is coming to your neighborhood? All we're doing is picking up the trash, you know, like it's not a bad thing. So that's like what's been fun about it. And then I guess that's pretty much it. You know, we'll see how it goes. So far so good. But I hope I don't manage to screw it all up somehow. Pretty much is what I'm afraid of. But that's what we're trying to do. I hope that answers your question.
And sir, I'll be very happy that you are mentioning about how Service Academy has influenced me. As a sir, it is a question personally from you, like what kind of changes which created you? Like it will be like a motivation, some sort of thing. If you can share this kind of things.
Yeah, I could talk about hardships in my own life, although it would take a long time.
If time allows.
What I can tell you, though, I'll tell you on the flip side. So definitely finding my way out of the darkest parts of my own life have come through the voluntary help of other people exclusively. And that's not to say that there aren't other solutions, but like if you go to a doctor for alcoholism, probably they're going to point you to AA at some point, right? And AA is voluntary. The reason for that, part of that's an insurance thing. How else, what are you supposed to say? Right? So there's just an element of it that, like, your life is yours. Like, you have to be the one who doesn't touch a hot stove, right? If it has to be you, even though it's not fair. That's what we call life. So helping people with that is it's important. It's important that it's agnostic, so to speak, of any of these other things. So that has happened for me, and it changed my life greatly. But some of those good behaviors, like, you know, I'm not remotely perfect. I'm like not even, it's a stupid thing for me to even have to point that out. Like, I'm not, you know, but I have had some good behaviors inculcated in me that despite myself, I would do because, like, I trusted an old man who made me learn how to do it. And I did it. And one of those things was, like, listen to your elders, like, sit and let them finish speaking, like, let them talk and listen and learn from them. They know things you don't know. And so I can recall, I don't even know how many times that I've just been sitting there, like, and, you know, I don't know, I'm supposed to go to a meeting, but I don't. I like let it, I'll be 15 minutes late. Like, I can handle it or whatever. And then at the end of that conversation, you know, they're like, hey, by the way, would you like to meet blah, blah, blah person? And it winds up being someone who totally changes your life, right? And, like, there's all these small things that, like, if you were to look back on your own life and all your own decision-making process, you try to explain to someone, how did it go so well? What happened? You'll find yourself, the words fail you, because it's small things. It's small things that somebody who's been good to you taught you how to do. And then you did that and something good happened. But it's a small thing. It's a soccer coach, you know, it's like a family friend or a teacher, you know, and it's somebody who just was of service to you. It wasn't like what they're necessarily paid to do or whatever, but it worked. And then you did that and something amazing happened. And another example of that for me was I was feeling sorry for myself because I was leaving my job. And a friend of mine asked me to go grab a cup of coffee because he was having a hard time. And I was like, inside my head, I was like, no, you know, like I am having a hard time, not you. And but I said yes. And I drove all the way to where he was, which is not supposed to be far away, but it took an hour with traffic, and I was full of resentments and everything. And when I got there, he basically filled me in on an entire career path that I didn't even know existed. And it wound up, you know, being what I chose to do with the rest of my life. And so I could literally give you like dozens of examples where simply going against what like I deserve this kind of like it's my like kind of thing where you'd totally be forgiven. Like before I went to grad school, my roommate, we were bros, man. We were gonna get a cat, and it was gonna be an adventure cat. We lived near the beach, and we were gonna have like it was gonna be awesome. It was gonna be like a like me and my buddy and our cool cat, and we live on the beach and all this stuff. He literally handed me a PlayStation 2 remote, and he was like, "Dude, do you want to try and play Skyrim?" And I had to like back out of the room because I was like, I don't know, man. I think I want to go to grad school. Like that's the decision that you're making in that, because it's 1,000 hours of gameplay if you want to enjoy it, right? So like there's all these little things, right? And I got lucky in all those situations. And there's other situations where I failed, which, you know, I could share with you in private. But there's no reason that it has to be left to chance. Like you can help people to steer towards, to just be leaning in the right direction. And certainly for me, the times when I've been lucky enough to take the good advice of other people, it's worked out very well for me. So that's what we're trying to make a little bit easier for other people too.
Randall,
Hi,
you...
Chris.
Yeah, go ahead, Randall.
Hi, good evening or good morning, maybe. I think
Yeah,
it's morning.
it's morning. Yeah, good evening to
you. Hi. I have a two-part question, and I'll ask the first question first, and then you go ahead if possible. Could you tell me a little more about Service Academy's, economic model? I mean, you have to earn money yourself to drink the coffee you're drinking and all of that as well. So how does it work? You said that you all don't taking money. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're a nonprofit. In the U.S. tax code, a nonprofit means that we don't have stock. But just for if there's anyone else on the call, so donations, but those donations are tax deductible. So if I make, let's say I make $99,000 a year, and then I get a $2,000 raise, my tax bracket goes up. So my taxes were 32%, now they're 34%. I got a $2,000 raise, but I lost, $4,000 that I have to pay in taxes. It behooves me to now donate $2,000 to a charity, because then my taxable income is now again $99,000. That charity could be Service Academy. So for those of you on the call who are trying to understand the nonprofit model in the US, that's how that works. So we seek donations. I don't have like special interest donors, for example, right? Like the gun industry or something like that. That's not how we're doing things. Anyone can go to the website and donate $5 or whatever, and we're kind of hoping for the best, and we'll see what happens.
All right. Thanks. And Chris, this part of this question might have a certain overlap with what Solomon was talking about. I think he also created a kind of what you would look at as a polarity between the individual interests and community interests. And also, I realized that through the activities, there is a certain idea of altruism that Service Academy promotes. The examples that you said, rake someone's lawn for leaves and sit and listen to some of your elders, clean, do a cleaning drive in your locality. I think a lot of these also eventually are signs that this needs to be done because of a certain fracture in the system. Why is it that there is trash in your locality? Why is it that there is no one who's helping in the neighborhood itself, or the son of the person who needs his lawn raked out? Or why is it that there are no neighbors who can listen in to an elder when they need to talk? So, this model of altruism looks largely at. It seemed to me like it looked at kind of a narrow idea of what might be altruism without looking at structures that kind of propagate a certain level of maybe ignorance of the ignoring the elders in your family, or ignoring the fact that you live in a community where creating trash means you have to take care of it as well. So, could you tell me a little bit? I mean, in a way, I'm asking you about the ideology of this kind of service that then is directed towards these problems. I think I see the symbolism in being humanly kind but is there some aspect of it that looks at the larger structures then and how those aspects too can be addressed? Or do you, I mean, is that a limitation that Service Academy makes, that these are the, so to say, apolitical apolitical work that people do as a gesture of goodwill in that sense? I mean, that is my understanding. Please correct me if I'm wrong also on this.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are great questions, and I'm in a virtual room full of some pretty smart people. So, I'm familiar with the sort of the urge to figure it all out, and this is how society should be, right? And social engineering. So there aren't great examples of heavy-handed social engineering going well, sadly, no matter how well-intentioned. I think one of the best examples is probably Japan. And Japan, for example, teaches what we would think of, we might all agree is like a pretty good moral thing. Like, so you learn a lot about your own culture and about how to enjoy the day and calisthenics and the mind-body connection and a lot of different things as part of your public education. And nevertheless, we're in a situation where Japan's birth rate is like the worst of them all, or among that, and other odd things are kind of happening. But primarily, what normally happens in that setting is a kind of lazy ethnocentrism. What happens is, like, no, they don't learn any languages other than Japanese, and they don't respect any cultures other than Japanese. And that's like a natural outcome of having a prescribed morality. And so when it's a top-down thing, that's almost unavoidable. Now, I'm speaking generalities, of course. I have many friends from Japan who are very open-minded, speak great English, whatever, right? But they're the ones who told me about this stuff in the first place, right? Because they have, like, it comes out of the side of the can one way or another. There's no way for me to rule society perfectly that will work, sadly. It's like part of the problem that we're stuck with. And so what I'm trying to do is help people sort out, well, how do I control my own behavior as good as I can, such that I value my community and I'm valued by my community. And my belief, and this is like where it's a leap of faith. My belief is that'll work at the macro level. That if that's the soil that you're working with, what grows from it will be better than any other possible outcome. So that's the belief. But your point is well taken. We're marrying a lot of different metaphysical things, right? Like, this is part Christian, part Buddhist, there's a lot of different things in there where we're not telling you what to think. And it's not clear, what will happen there. And that's not really supposed to be a synthesis of everything. We're just trying to go with ideas that have worked over time. So I hope that gets at what you were asking.
So also what you mentioned about this kind of lazy ethnocentrism, isn't that born out of a sense of traditionalism and what you would then eventually call conservatism as well? There's an idea of promoting the what has existed for the longest time, and that's what the state is doing in this case, in the case of Japan. And thanks, I think it's made it very clear what you said, that there is certainly an inward-looking aspect of what might be effective for me, what might be productive for me, and then eventually what might be altruistic for me as well.
Yeah, the answer is yes. That's the danger. There are dangers on both sides. This is like an order versus chaos argument, novelty versus establishment argument. And the Tao Te Ching, right, is like you are the line in the middle of the yin yang. That's what you're trying to be. So you want to plant your feet in things that you know work, but you want to apply those to problems that are new. And you don't have a prescribed solution. You might have a method that you trust, but you're willing to adapt it. But the solution could be anything. I think that's how we see this. So it's like novel problems, but the methods that we're using to try to address the problems don't have to be, conceived after 1,000 hours in a library, right? Like, what happens if we actually just try to be nice to each other and see where we wind up? Maybe it'll be a better place anyway, And I think there's reason to believe. Yeah,
better than in a certain sense. I mean, a kind of what you mentioned, being in the library. I think there's also a kind of an intellectualist argument in that direction.
Right.
So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, because what happens is you fall in love with your idea, and it's like, oh well, 1,000 people died in this small town trying to do your thing. It's like, we just didn't do it right. Well, that's not how you would feel if it was your town, right? You would be heartbroken. You're supposed to be heartbroken by that. So that's why I think if you start there, if you start at heart, if you start at relationship, and you don't wander from it, but then you try to do things that address other things, then it keeps you honest. It keeps the mission to the actual mission. So that's, again, why we're grassroots and why we're not trying to, take tax dollars and things like that.
Thank you, Randall, for your question, and thank you, Chris. Jay has his hand raised. Jay, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. So my question is basically like many times during this presentation, you have mentioned that your organization or sort of what you do is not political, or you're not trying to be affiliated with any political movement as such or any political party. But how do you avoid that when the issues you deal with are inherently political? You mentioned working with veterans. You mentioned working with addicts. Usually, addiction is a big part of the veteran community. The suicide rates among veterans is high. The entire opioid crisis is basically one big, disaster, that slow moving disaster. So these are all these are all sociological issues, right? There are sociological factors that have contributed to this, but these are also inherently political issues, especially like I follow the American politics very closely. So I see that, and these are very, political issues that have come up. So how do you avoid that in your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll answer your question with my personal story. So I was born and raised sort of like a leftist, sort of. Not really. Like we didn't, talk about politics at the table or anything like that, but it was like a liberal lion kind of a thing. Like West Wing would have been like the perfect way to describe the politics of my home growing up. And I was very involved, for example, when I was in high school. I went to a Catholic school, very conservative, but everybody there was a hippie. I mean, people were walking around because it was a time when the hippies were becoming school teachers. And so people were walking around they were actual hippies. I'm not calling them hippies. They were hippies from the 60s, right? And so they would like walk around with acoustic guitars, singing like "Our God is an awesome God," and it was like a little bit liberation theology-ish. A lot of them had left the Brotherhood so they could marry. So there was a little bit of like Christ is love kind of a vibe at the school. I was involved with activism for gay people in America. It was the 90s, and there was a story that some guy had just been murdered for being gay. That sounded, like the worst. I mean, it was like hard enough being who he was, and then the fact that he, like, on top of that, to be violently murdered and to feel nothing but shame and horror throughout publicly, seemed to me like something I couldn't abide. So I was active in trying to make sure that didn't ever happen. It turned out that I think he owed the guys money. They were drug dealers. So it was a little bit of a propaganda story. But nevertheless, that sort of thing had happened. So that motivated me. But then it turned out I felt lied to because I lived in the South. I went to school in Tennessee, and none of those people actually were racist, in fact. And they had smart ideas. They were nice. And they were nicer than all of the people who were right about everything up north. And I thought, how could this be? How come the people who are right about everything are so cold and mean to everybody? And the people who are nice are the ones who are wrong about everything. How could it, what's going on here, right? So I became an independent. And then I'm an American. I vote. I believe civics is important. So I vote conservative, generally speaking, in the American political spectrum. But I want progressives to vote, and I want them to vote for who they want to vote. I mean, that's the whole point, right? So when I say that like chair is a conservative idea, I mean it. That's the sort of a conservative I am. I think that we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater in the way that we view things, and we really are turned around, and people are genuinely confused. You can see that in deaths of despair. You can see it in metrics that have nothing to do with politics. There's confusion. And I think there are answers that don't have to be novel, right? So the answer to the technology of a smartphone is not like a smartphone that reminds you to put it down. I mean, that would be the closest thing, but like, it's not going to do that, right? So it's an established answer. It's a conservative answer, not in a political sense, in the sense that it's an answer that's always been the answer, which is go outside, walk in the woods, have a dream for your future, fall in love with it, and someone will fall in love with you and your dream. And you'll find out later that you couldn't have done it without her, right? That's how it works. But none of that happens inside. You have to go outside. So your question, I think, assumes a couple premises. So you use the word sociology, questionable discipline. I mean, it's a thing, right? But it's a thing that makes fundamental assumptions about social engineering. So I'm not so sure. And you mentioned that things are inherently political, which is another way of saying certain things, which I think maybe that's like not the cleanest way of saying them, right? So it's true that in a democracy everybody votes, and therefore it's like everything's political. But actually, most people agree about most things, like chair, like table, right? And all of those things fit with like a sense of conservatism. So I don't think that a person is a conservative or is a progressive. I think that's wrong. And it's a notion that's been put out there to try to make one of them win, to make them smash together and synthesize a new third thing, the utopia thing. But it's crazy because we're all divided inwardly on many levels, not just political levels, but all kinds of levels. We're complex. So I think that what I'm trying to do is more speak to that totality of existence, that wholeness, the unity of people that involves contradiction, as opposed to take a side, if that makes sense.
It does. So basically, a thing that stood out to me when you talked about cell phones, right? You can't solve this addiction to a screen with a screen that says "put me down." I'll raise you cigarettes here. Right. In India, it's a very common thing to see. If you go to, I went to watch Gladiator 2 in cinema hall. The first thing I saw was an ad, with very disturbing and basically very real imagery of people with cancer, essentially with appendages missing, amputated. So cigarettes have been, this is not a new issue. Addiction to cigarettes, basically. I mean, in the West now it's vapes that people are talking about, but cigarettes have been sort of this, from the lost generation to boomers to millennials to Gen Z, Gen Alpha. This has been this indicator, right, of addiction to cigarettes, and everybody knows it's harmful to your health. Everybody knows everybody knows that cigarette like addiction to cigarettes will eventually lead to a very painful death as well. And it's not affecting you, it's affecting your family. So it's the individual responsibility of the smoker that is highlighted when you when you advocate for prevention, right? Right. So what do you do in the case of cell phone where it's not the community that is affected, right? In cigarettes, you have secondhand smoke, right? Don't smoke around your children. Don't smoke when you're pregnant. Don't smoke. There's a million guidelines that have been tried and tested through centuries of basically death. I'll say, but cell phones do not have that inherent, because obviously none of us can imagine our lives without cell phones now, right? And future generations will know nothing but cell phones. I am 23. My formative years happened before we had smartphones. So by the time I was 16, I got my first smartphone, like proper smartphone, at 18, after I finished high school. But uh, any kid who's 2 right now is walking around with a phone that's bigger than their head, right? So that's a very different sort of interaction that a cell phone has in society than a cigarette has. So how do you basically navigate those situations?
Yeah. So again, there's going to be like a regulatory component to things, but I just don't put all my faith in any man-made institution. Like, and why should I? Right. So an example of a regulatory failure, right, is that cigarettes, were signed off by all the doctors. The doctors were like, yeah, I smoke Camels, to relax. And then the FDA, it's like, oh, well, if only the government would step in with some sort of a Food and Drug Administration that would help us regulate this. Well, we had it, and it told us to smoke cigarettes, right? So, like, there's no reason to blindly trust any of that stuff. Now, there's also no reason to be blindly skeptical. I guess maybe a healthy skepticism, but not like a neurotic healthy skepticism, just like a second opinion kind of a thing, right? So that's like all kind of what it is. But ultimately, it's going to come down to your own decisions. Cigarettes, tobacco, it's a stimulant, right? Cigarettes are gross, and not because cigarettes are gross, but because they take the tobacco and they cover it in all kinds of chemicals and stuff designed to like really like terrorize your body. So that's all legal, man. You know what I mean? So I wish I could tell you like, oh yeah,
But
we should make it illegal. But
the legalization of cigarettes happened because of rampant lobbying by the pharmaceutical industry. The tobacco industry was huge in America in
That's
in
right.
1920s.
Should we make that illegal? But yeah, but you're saying like, oh yeah, like, oh, my knee hurts because the ground was there when my leg crashed into it. Like, yeah, I know. But the problem is like there is money, there is government, there are institutions. You can't separate them. And the worst thing you could do is give the one institution, government, all the guns and money. You've only made all of your problems localized to one all-powerful problem. So how do you hold them accountable? My answer to your question is, again, going back to every answer to this question, other than do it yourself, is I want a dictatorship. It sounds easier. So the answer to your question is you have to control your congressmen. You have to control them with your voice. And the only way you're going to do that is if you're motivated to get off the couch in the first place, right? So that's kind of where I'm trying to go with these kinds of questions is like, let's let the marketplace of ideas actually hash it out. Like, you might be surprised to know this, but in the United States of America, Congress has two primary responsibilities: to pass legislation, which you already know, and to declare war. What you might not know is that we haven't declared war since 1942. What have we been doing all this time, I wonder? So I wish that we would claw back sovereignty across the board rather than give it up, rather than appoint an agency to solve my problems. Right now, it's going to be messy, no question about it, because there's going to be bad ideas along with the good ones, but at least they'll be our ideas, and we have a much higher likelihood of arriving at a good idea, entertaining all possible ideas, than hiring someone who's not accountable to us to do what they were already going to do, which is what's best for them. So if we make it a grassroots thing and everybody does what's best for them and each other, we'll wind up in a better place. But you have to back into it, which is less satisfying.
Forgive me if I'm like feel free to correct me, but that sounds a lot like an anarchic system of governance to me. Basically.
Well, it's libertarian in some. It's a
Libertarian.
libertarian
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
approach. Yeah, but it's not anarchic because there is still a government, right? So there are regulations. People do vote and pass laws, and you can go to prison, right? It's not like, oh, just everyone close your eyes and twirl around, and like the entropy will automatically radically create the best possible outcome. Like, no, there's always going to be a tension between authority and freedom. There is no way to avoid that tension. Any attempt to resolve the tension is ultimately going to destroy the thing itself. And it's a temptation that we all feel, because things are never as good as they could be. There's always one more person who's a little hungrier than they should be. There's always something that's going to be there. And if you notice, what that mimics is your own exact situation in your own life. It's never quite as perfect as it could be, but you can track towards better. And you know that over time, it'll be better. Whereas if you try to solve all your problems with one bullet right now, it will get worse, right? There are no silver bullets, and it's a good thing because bullets kill people. So, unfortunately, you do have to have a little bit of chaos, but you also have to have order. And it's mimicked this. It's not a coincidence that society mimics your internal condition, because society grows from the human condition. Like, so there's no tabula rasa. It's just not true. That's what genes are. I mean, there's so many reasons it's not true, but like, at any rate, our societies are reflections of who we already are in many, many ways. Now, it's like a hologram, because then the society reflects back on us and can shape us, but then we are still the ones who are in turn reflecting back on it and shaping it. So this tension is always there. And what I'm suggesting is I'm trying to teach people how to plant their feet when they're in like open space, right? How do you resolve a permanently relative situation? You have to generate some momentum, and you actually can do that. You can break the laws of physics because you have an imagination. And so you can generate momentum, and from that, you can build in a direction that's positive. And I think that we're going through this as like a whole civilization in a way that is new, novel, because we're global in a way that we've never been before. So I think it's important that we embrace this tension and the beauty that can create, and we put governors around the horrors that it can create, rather than try to like pour gas on one side of the spectrum and hope for the best, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. This was really nice having this discussion with you.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. It's been so much fun talking to you guys. I had no idea it was going to be, such a cool discussion. So I wish I could talk to you guys like every morning for an hour and a half. This is the best.
Since we don't have any more hands raised, I'm just going to ask one little question before we wrap up. So, sure. Chris, you mentioned a lot about, you began your session about mentioning about, the certain things are conserved because they work, right? And that's been the theme of the talk in a lot of ways. I just wanted to know your personal opinion on some of the things that you personally feel should not be conserved and are being conserved, but should not be conserved. Personal, nothing.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, what's something that we're ready to do away with, right? Well, at the broader societal level, I don't know. It's probably not fair for me to comment. In my own life, like the one thing that I like to challenge people to do is join the 5 a.m. club, which is wake up at 5 a.m. every day for a month and just see how your life changes. Then I found out that Muslims do this every day for prayer, or it contributes to how productive they are. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. That checks out. But if I'm not involved in like a 5 a.m. challenge, then my sleep hygiene isn't nearly as good as I would like it to be. because I'm watching like some cool YouTube about Stoicism, and it's like 2:00 in the morning, and like, I'm like, oh, this is so good, I can use this in a class. But the fact is I'm like being low key hypocritical because I'm staying up all hours of the night when I'm trying to embody a better way of doing things for the people who I work with. So like that's an example of something that I would like to do better. I got the sense that your question is like, what institutions can I like discard? I don't know. That's a hard one, right? I mean, for an institution to exist, it has to have done at least something right for at least a really long time. If I say progressivism, then I've destroyed the question, because how could it be progress if we're destroying progressivism? I don't like so, but that's why it's a propagandistically named ism in the first place. But I mean, like, I think, yeah, maybe that is it. Frankly, I think we're in love with. Since at least the 30s, at least the 60s, we're in love with a concept of progress that can kind of be a high. It's like today's better than yesterday just by the passage of time. Whatever I said today is automatically smart because today follows yesterday. And whatever I say tomorrow is automatically better than what I say today. It's not true. I mean, Aristotle said smart things, they're still smart. There's no improving on it. They're just smart. A equals B, B equals C, A equals C. It does, right? So we have fallen in love. We've gotten high on progress. And this has actually been a thing that has been like an Achilles heel for the West anyway, throughout the Industrial Revolution and since, where progressivism was the justification for slavery. It was Christians who wanted to end slavery. It was progressives who thought it was the best possible outcome for the slaves. It's better than Africa, right? It was progressivism that gave us eugenics. It was all science. Everything Hitler did was science. And it was a moral argument against that. That was, and if, for those of you who doubt, the eugenics movement was huge in America and elsewhere in the West, including in England with respect to Indians. So that was all progressivism. And that was all incorrect. So we're in love with a concept of progress that is self-defining. And we don't have a clean metric for what actually constitutes progress. We're not using outcomes. So we're just saying anything that's new must be progress, but that's not true. So I think that's something that it's in nobody's interest, right? Like, nobody would argue in favor of those things now. And yet we somehow are unwilling to associate them with their own movement at the time, which I don't understand. I think it holds us back. So that's something I think we can let go of without also discarding a vibrant debate about, but how can things actually get better, Chris? Like, there are real social problems, right? What are we supposed to do? I think those are valid conversations. But to argue that you're somehow on the right side of history, it's like you're on the same side as Adolf Hitler. Like, let's just let go of this idea. It's not true. And there's no historical basis for it. It's just a thing we like to say. And I don't think we should say that anymore. So like, we could let go of that. And I think it would free us up to have more realistic conversations about outcomes without just pretending that throwing money at something is going to actually fix it when usually it multiplies it. So that's one, but that's like a super loaded one that I feel like leaves everybody feeling totally unsatisfied. I know you wanted me to say like Catholicism or something. Yeah, I could. Like, Catholicism committed huge errors. Here's what the Catholic Church should do better, since I'm destroying myself all over the place right now. When I go to Catholic Church, I'm Catholic by upbringing, but I don't like to put money in the bin in like the hat because I don't want to pay their legal fees. So they had all these scandals around sort of like various types of abuse, and I don't feel that they properly atoned for them. I feel that they tried to sweep them under the rug. So that to me is a failure. Now, it doesn't mean you should discard Catholicism, but like what I'm saying is like, that is something that I think they should hold themselves to a higher standard. Their own standard is the life of Jesus, and that to me seems in conflict with it, right? So that's an example where there's an institution on the right that is, I think, could do more. And the Pope, for example, conservatives hate the Pope because he's like he's fine with the LGBTQ plus community. But geopolitical types are questioning the Pope because he's ordained bishops in China who are like not Catholic, or at least the Chinese Communist Party has chosen the bishops, and the Pope has signed off on them. Meanwhile, there was already a secret church in China that was actually doing religion, and those people did not get signed off on by the Pope. So it's unclear why the Vatican seems to be playing ball with the CCP when the CCP is obviously enslaving Uyghurs, Tibetans, and killing Falun Gong and using for organ harvesting and all forms of religion, Muslim, Islam, and various forms of Christian and Buddhist. Obviously, they've kidnapped the Panchen Lama. I mean, their record on religion is as bad as ever there was. And that's the Communist Party of China. And obviously they have a free market. There's a lot of money involved. They're bad communists, but it enables their totalitarianism. And the Pope seems to be, playing ball with them. So I guess we're gonna have to pull this off YouTube. I don't know. We'll see. But so I don't know. I hope that was somewhat satisfying on the back end.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a scintillating conversation, and you can see the kind of participation we had today was unprecedented. And so you were quite popular. So yes, thank you, Chris, for joining us today. We are very, very grateful that we could hear from somebody who has the kind of experience and in service, the kind of service that you're doing for humanity. So thank you so much. And we are really, really grateful that you joined us today.
Thank you all for your time and attention. I don't take it lightly. I appreciate each of you. Thanks very much. It's an honor. Bye, guys.